It's never too late to become the person you always believed you could be. Welcome to the Austin James Haynes podcast. I'm Austin. I'm your host, from Fortune 500 company to poet, and I know that you have incredible seeds of infinitude buried in you. What is that? It's untapped potential. That quote I opened up with was a quote that was penned by a woman named Mary Ann Evans, but the quote is credited to George Eliot, which was actually her pen name. She's an incredible author in her own right who found her way into midlife and beyond. And maybe that's what today is going to be for you. I have an incredible episode. If you are in that midlife season, you are going to want to save this. I believe this is going to touch you deeply. I'm going to go back into some timeless wisdom. I'm going to share with you the wisdom of an artist from Japan from the late 18th century into the early 19th century that became famous, I should say, for certain types of drawings and paintings. And these paintings were said to have inspired Vincent van Gogh. So while he died before Vincent van Gogh was born, he was certainly alive when Henry David Thoreau was alive. So I'm sure he probably knew about this particular artist. So let me dive in today. I want to share with you a poem that was submitted by one of our listeners, Laurie. So Laurie, thank you so much for submitting this poem. It really touched me the moment I read it, and I never heard of it before. But after I read it, I thought I need to share this on my podcast because it speaks so much to so many things, but especially midlife. So I'm going to read that, and we may chunk this out into 2 episodes because I'm not going to be able to go through all the details of the poem, but I'm going to share the poem with you today. And I dug a little deeper to share some words from the actual artist. So the poem I'm going to share is from a man named Robert Keyes, who was a scholar in Japanese drawings. And that's how he came across Hokusai, is the artist's name. Hokusai, if you're following along and you want to make a note of that, that's Hokusai. And Roger Keyes became a person who studied, a traveling scholar from Brown University who studied Hokusai and wrote this beautiful poem about this artist. So I'm going to share that with you now, and then I'm going to share the artist's words from his own works. This is going to be incredibly insightful. So bookmark this, stay with it. This is called Hokusai Says. Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention. Notice. He says, keep looking. Stay curious. He says, there is no end to seeing. He says, look forward to getting old. He says, keep changing. You just get more who you really are. He says, get stuck. Accept it. Repeat yourself as long as it is interesting. He says, keep doing what you love. He says, keep praying. He says, every one of us is a child. Every one of us is ancient. Every one of us has a body. He says, every one of us is frightened. He says, every one of us has to find a way to live with fear. He says, everything is alive. Water is alive. Everything has its own life. Everything lives inside us. He says, live with the world inside you. He says, it doesn't matter if you draw or write books. It doesn't matter if you saw wood or catch fish. It doesn't matter if you sit at home and stare at the ants on the veranda. or the shadow of the trees and gardens, or the shadow of the trees and grasses in your garden. It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Contentment is life living through you. Joy is life living through you. Satisfaction and strength is life living through you. He says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Love. Feel. Let life take you by the hand. Let life live through you. And as I'm sitting here, it's important to note the lighting is changing. If you're on the podcast, sun is setting. There's a gloaming sky above, creating a rare lighting and an unusual tint throughout the forest as the leaves rustle and the squirrels move about. And I take in this miraculous moment. Pause and breathe with me here. Pause and breathe. Next to the Great Beech Tree behind me that was planted in about 1860 by Robert Wister on Andorra Farm, which he purchased, which is now part of the Wissahickon Valley. The Wissahickon Environmental Center is not far from here. And if you're listening, you can hear the leaves. If you're on the video, I'm panning up here just so you can see the tree behind me and its incredible trunk and branches. Back in 2018, a limb fell and the tree met its demise shortly after. But not to be left behind, a couple woodpeckers took shelter and raised two chicks, successfully raised two chicks in the old tree. And now fungi now grow all over the old immense branches, and there's other branches that have dislodged that are strewn about as I look around, and the leaves and the orange tint that cover them is just amazing. And this would be a place to sit and observe, as it says in the poem. Pay attention and notice. Keep looking. Stay curious. I'm going to share some additional words by Hokusai, and then on the next episode, we're going to unpack this incredible poem and these two things, the poems and the poem and the words I'm about to share. This is from Hokusai's exact words. So the poem was from Roger Keyes, and it's called Hokusai Says. And now I'm going to share words that are literally from Hokusai, the artist himself. From the age of 6, I had a passion for copying the form of things. And since the age of 50, I have published many drawings. Yet of all I drew by my 70th year, there is nothing worth taking into account. At 73 years, I partly understand the structure of animals, birds, insects, and fishes, and the life of grasses and plants. And so at 86, I shall progress further. At 90, I shall even further penetrate their secret meaning. And by 100, I shall perhaps truly have reached the level of the marvelous and divine. When I am 110, each dot, each line will possess a life of its own. It's important to note that extracting this writing, I'm interpreting that he wrote this at 86. He did die at 88. But there's so much to unpack from this poem by Roger Keyes and these words by the artist himself. I'm sure they were interpreted from Japanese, but there's lots to unpack here. And so if you're in your midlife season, I want you to listen to this again and see what you can unpack from this. And then in the very next episode, I'm going to go back through the poem and give you my own interpretation of these incredible words. So this is Austin, live just after sunset in Wissahickon Valley, right near the Wissahickon Environmental Center, recording this podcast right next to the Great Beech, which is slowly dispersing into the landscape, and nevertheless an incredible resource for all the wildlife that continues to live and thrive in this unique environment that somehow feels like you went back in time. So thank you so much. I'm going to end with what I started. It's never too late to become the person you always believed you could be. And if I can go from a Fortune 500 company to a poet after being a college dropout, and really poetry finding me, I did not seek it. It was something that lay dormant. What seeds of infinitude lay dormant in you, and all you need to do maybe is lift your head up, grab some insights, open yourself up to some calling, albeit subtle, and take someday and make it today. And even if it's a micro change or micro moment that you can bring into this moment, your life can dramatically change and will never be the same. Thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast. I wanted to make a quick correction. Upon further research, it looks like the correct pronunciation for the Japanese artist is Hokusai. Hokusai. I was saying Hokusai. Now, it could be a tomato or tomato thing, but I wanted to make sure I get the closest pronunciation to the man's name. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode when I dig deeper into the poem by Roger Keyes, as also noted, and the words of Hokusai. I look forward to connecting with you then.